All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's 5 p.m. on the East Coast, so we will get started. We have a lot to talk about and a lot of exciting presentation and discussion to follow. I'm Piyush Mathur. I'm the co-founder for BrainX Community, and welcome to BrainX Community Live, the July edition, which is focused on AI in echocardiography. So for those who are joining us for the first time, we started around 4 years ago with the philosophy that we needed to build a platform for machine learning or AI in healthcare for good. And since those 4 years, we have grown to be a community of 4,000 plus international members. Just our LinkedIn group, which is very active, has 2,000 plus members, and a lot of resources which are there through our website that I'll go through briefly. And of course, we do these monthly live sessions to help educate everybody and create a community where we can participate together. So this is our website. You can go over there and you will find different sections. For updates, you can go to the homepage and you'll find all the updates right there. We do have a connect section which posts information about our live meetings, just like we are having today. And if you missed that, don't worry about it, because you can subscribe to our BrainX Community YouTube channel and you can watch them over there. As I mentioned, we have a very active LinkedIn group where we share a lot of scientific information. Hopefully, with the COVID pandemic behind us, there are a lot of opportunities for us to interact in a better way and attend meetings, and all those information are shared over there. We have a learn section where we post links to some of the key publications related to AI in healthcare. These are classified and categorized. As you can see, here is an example where through the filter on the web page, a list of cardiology publications are linked and available to you so that you can go and read these publications. Of course, there are a lot of journals that are focused on AI in healthcare where these publications are coming along. So if you want to know which are the key journals, you can put in the filter for journals and you can look at the list of journals for the same. And then books. There are a lot of books being published about different aspects of AI in healthcare. And if you want to know more, you want to read about it, you can go to the book section through the filter and it will provide you with the key content there. Data is something that everybody is looking for, and there are quite a few open source data sets. So right through our website, we provide you links to open source data sets. Of course, we cannot provide you the data sets directly, but we provide you with these links. And these are specifically for open source ones. And these have been heavily used for different AI research work. So if you want to get started with that, you can do that. These are also classified. So if you're looking for a data set that is related to echocardiography, thanks to one of our speakers over here, it's available, called the EchoNet, and we'll probably hear and learn more about it through this presentation. So a lot of data sets available to you through links on our data section. And we all want to learn from others. We all want to learn from the experts from across the world who are applying AI in healthcare. So we have our special podcast series called BrainX Talks, which has been brought to us by Dr. Ashish Khanna and Alok Kothari. So you can listen to these conversations, listen to how they got started and what is their vision for the future. As I mentioned previously, there are a lot of meetings and conferences that are occurring, a lot focused on AI in healthcare. So if you want to know where we should connect next, well, go to our meeting section and you can find a suitable conference for yourself. Now, earlier in the year, similar to the past 3 years, we published our 2021 year in review. It is about to hit 5,000 reads on ResearchGate, so it has been very well received. But it is always interesting to see which specialty is the front runner. So of course, radiology and oncology have been front runners for years, but as you can see on the slide, cardiology is right there in the top 10. And that brings us to the focus of today's event, which is AI in echocardiography. We have our moderator, Dr. Avirup Guha, who is also a consultant to BrainX. He is a funded physician scientist who has dedicated his clinical work and research to the field of cardio-oncology. He's also the current inaugural director of cardio-oncology at Medical College of Georgia. And he's got pretty extensive research background. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but with that, I'll welcome him and hand it over to you, Avirup.
Hey, thank you, Piyush. And I'm having a sort of major fanboy moment over here because all the speakers on the panel have heard at various places where it's hard to get a place to sit in the audience. So getting to sit in my office and listen to all three of them is going to be fantastic. So with that, I'll start with the introduction. So our first speaker is going to be Dr. Partho Sengupta. He's the chair of cardiology at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School and University Hospital. He finished his training from Mayo Clinic in Rochester, in Arizona, and then has over 250 publications. He is associate editor for JACC Cardiology Imaging and has contributed a lot to the field of AI and echocardiogram through various different ways. He's every organization which has association with echocardiogram, including ACE, AACIO. He's been there and done that. Our next speaker is going to be David Ouyang from the Department of Cardiology and the Division of Artificial Intelligence at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. He's an accomplished physician scientist and a statistician who's had training, very in-detail training in both AI and statistics from major places such as Rice, UCSF, and has performed research with echo data, which he's going to share with us. He's currently at Cedars-Sinai. And our third speaker is Dr. Christopher Troianos, and he's the chair of anesthesiology at Cleveland Clinic. And he's the current president of the National Board of Echocardiography and is the chair of the American Society of Anesthesiologists, and also has contributed to the field of echocardiography and AI. He will contribute to a panel discussion we will have after the talk of Dr. Ouyang. With that, the details of each of the speakers are presented on the BrainX website, which Piyush is going to put the link in the chat to know more about our each speaker. And I'll invite Dr. Sengupta to share his slides and present his talk.
Thank you very much, Avirup and Piyush, and this is a great honor to be here. And I'm really myself in this moment of machine learning through this whole process. So it's incredible that the field has just evolved over the last 10 years. What I will do is to recap some of the moments which have been exhilarating experience and to see the whole field grow. And I will just postulate some of the trends that are happening in the field, and then we can come up together and understand how do we assimilate the workforce and how do we keep in touch with what's happening in the field, and the realities on the ground are probably more important with the workforce shortage, how AI is going to interface with the evolution of cardiac diagnostic and what we do in clinical cardiology. Here are some of my disclosures. So I started working in the field of artificial intelligence, basically out of curiosity in 2010 when I started writing my papers. I was a fan of doing multiple correlations, and I would get rejected from the papers from the reviewers that I'm doing a fishing expedition. But I didn't stop there. So in 2011, I started working with some of the early data scientists of why we in cardiology, we cannot do what they're doing with gene expression profiles, where they can do multiple array comparisons. And why is it that in cardiology, we have to be so specified in our hypothesis? Why is an exploratory pattern recognition not a direction? And in 2013, luckily, I had an opportunity to give a talk at ASC, and where I was boldly presenting this new paradigm of machine learning and AI and growth that would happen. And there was a growth, and there was a trend that set at that time in 2013 onwards. We really saw some exponential, and then that really became double exponential with the COVID. And it's been just heartening to see that this evolution has happened in such a brief period of time. So what the trends have currently come in and we are experiencing is if we organize in terms of what it means for the field of echocardiography, we're seeing a trend in how diagnostic cardiology and all the equipment that we use, starting from simple ECG and perhaps all the variables, are soon going to provide us an interface on understanding when echocardiography would be appropriate and when we could reduce the burden of doing sending patients with low probability tests and normal echocardiograms, if there's a way for us to make it more opportunistic to be able to detect and sending patients with appropriate needs. That's a paradigm that is eminent. We see here work from Mayo Clinic. We have done some work in diastolic function. You can extract features from the ECG to build up tools towards better insights on parameters that would come from echocardiography assessment. So a screening tool for appropriate referral for echocardiography is perhaps going to be the near future of how we will be doing high throughput screening in communities. The second trend, obviously, that we see is that the quantification of what is so important in echocardiography, as the field has evolved into quantitative information that has grown over the last several decades, is an area that AI is really going to do the major uplifting and the role, be it view recognition, be it tracing and segmentation, volume calculation in 2D, 3D, or even further interfacing of indices, calculation of ejection fraction, strain, or higher level quantitative parameter interaction is an area towards it's unstoppable. This is going to make it easier for people to go through their work throughput efficiency in high burden labs. This is the direction we have to do, we have to take, and this is going to be eminent. We started very long time back in 2011 and 12 with simple parameters that would be coming from echocardiography to see if that made sense in using AI tools. But the field has really been augmented with the introduction of deep learning techniques, and this is one of the early works from Dr. Arnott's group, showing the ability to use deep learning for view classification. And it actually, in that study, they had a expression that it was superior to board certified cardiologists taking the miniaturized views and being able to correctly classify. Actually, the deep learning was able to do that better. So it was interesting to see an expert level classification. Certainly at the end of the day, when you're tired and exhausted, you need a little bit of augmentation to just be able to stay vigilant of some of the errors. And this is something that I can see could be useful as a decision support tool during the workflow. Then came the work from Dr. Rahul Deo of making a completely autonomous echocardiography lab, not only just doing the measurements, but also taking that into consideration and building them into the common phenotypes, be it hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, amyloid, and so on and so forth. So this work was a trendsetter that you can actually have an autonomously running a lab, and the emergence of decision support tool would be possible to really have a physician go through his day. But this work had initial promise, which was subsequently really made further, has recently become even more interesting and more accurate in precision. For example, David's work, Dr. Ouyang's work on taking simple measurements with high precision using deep learning tools, getting time gated assessments, and then being able to take that information to extract a high level of precision in detecting different types of phenotypes, be it hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and amyloid. This is a consistent trend that is emerging in the literature, and it brings home the fact that we can use some of these tools in our our daily practice. And I think now the next step, as David will probably show, is to put them through some randomized trial to show how well they can perform. Maybe they are better than experts, maybe they're as good as experts, and this is going to be very important for standardization of the tools and the opportunity of making mainstream echocardiography available across the world, even in remote settings where experts are not available. David's work on using AI for a time volume assessment again was a trendsetter, because this was a work which not only brought to us a higher level model for deep learning, but they made a new change by introducing a huge data set that was going to be available to the community for them to jumpstart looking into new tools and new methods of exploration. So this was the trendsetter paper of how we use open data sets. So we really find this was very useful and has created an opportunity of people to not only reduplicate the work, but also do activities beyond what has been done here. So this is another trend that we're seeing: more and more openness, more and more ability of people to validate the work in different settings, and not only just high-end ultrasound system. We see the same degree of enthusiasm in using such tools in point-of-care ultrasound technology. And I wonder whether the availability of different vendors wanting to do a point-of-care ultrasound is going to make it easier for people who don't know how to do mainstream echocardiography to use, not only for navigating and acquiring the images, but also to get some degree of an idea if the certain subsets of patient population would need to be sent for more accurate diagnosis or more quantification that would be necessary. A lot of questions of how this is going to be deployed, what is the optimum utilization, but nevertheless is an important consideration given the growth of point-of-care ultrasound techniques that have happened beyond the realm of cardiology communities. And another area which is setting up trend and which is yet to be taken up in clinical practice is using AI to predict and have risk stratification. And there is an opportunity beyond simple echocardiography images to be able to just use different types of features and put them all together, and eventually utilize the information the way a conventional cardiologist would utilize information in clinical practice. They try to integrate and assimilate large-scale information and try to understand which patient needs to be presented to the surgeons, or where the patient, if the patient is okay to be going home and seen on a next visit. So more work to be done in this area, but again, this is a direction. But what I find fascinating about is an unprecedented opportunity in knowing the world of cardiac imaging and diagnostics using the lens of AI. Not only it introduces an opportunity for us to question what we understand about our understanding of different diseases, may be a condition like diastolic dysfunction, which is highly dependent upon multivariable disease characterization, but at the same time is a cognitive challenge, or be it simple condition like aortic stenosis with so many different phenotypes. Maybe AI is going to give us a different tool to recharacterize the heterogeneity in cardiovascular disease and perhaps create new taxonomy of how patients are identified, or be it new sets of information, taking the texture-based data from cardiac ultrasound and extracting information that would otherwise be available from magnetic cardiac resonance imaging, the field of radiomics, or some people have called it ultrasomics, is ripe for innovation and exploration. Or be it deep learning itself, trying to take the ultrasound images and trying to characterize information that is of a biomarker level, be it BNP troponin. Imagine the possibilities of how we utilize the information. So the future is going to be very exciting, but some of these later opportunities are required to be utilized in new ways, in innovative ways, and will require us to participate in conversation of how we utilize some sets of information. But again, the use of unsupervised machine learning and feature extraction, discovery of new phenotypes, combining this with other areas of growth like in genomics, radiogenomics, and so on and so forth, for looking at pharmacogenomic discoveries and drug targets is amazing. Or maybe it's creating a digital twin, taking the information and creating a digital twin and using different types of adversarial techniques to manipulate the function and anatomy of the heart in a model before it is actually done on a patient is again an opportunity. And we have seen some of the uptake of these types of approaches in transcatheter heart valve therapies, where we are doing it on a model. So this again is a huge undertaking and an opportunity. But despite all of this growth that has happened, there are several questions that are to be told and that are yet unsettled. First of all, we have evolved from a clinical paradigm which taught medicine and clinical cardiology in completely different ways, and we are emerging into an area which is probably very foreign to a lot of people, and that creates people to feel very unsettled. How do we build the trust in AI? Do we use explainable AI so that we can investigate what the AI algorithms are doing? How do we talk about some of the opportunities in regulating? What are the responsibilities? What about the ethical use of free data that is being made available? It's an enormous amount of work that probably needs to be done at societal levels or in communities for people to come together, or even to develop standardized protocols of how AI investigations to be carried out. There is really not much supervision or not much information available. So there's a huge opportunity. But finally, coming to the fact, will we be replaced by physicians? Well, I don't really think in the next 5 or 10 years, physicians will be replaced by an AI model or a robot. But certainly I believe in the world of an augmented physician, an augmented intelligence. And the low-hanging fruit right now is to look into solution of how get more free time and reduce burnouts. And I think those are the immediate needs. So if a way we could all come together to answer some of the low-hanging fruits and get less distracted, what the future could be, and develop in an evolution and embrace it an opportunity, so that finally we'll have a realization of a promise that started relatively soon, but is galloping and accelerating. And I think is a great journey for us and to all partake in this evolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sengupta. Excellent talk. We'll just quickly move on to David's talk and have a discussion after David's talk in a panel discussion. So without further ado, Dr. Ouyang, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation, and really excited to be speaking with the group. Dr. Sengupta gave a fantastic overview of the field and a lot of both the, I think, opportunities as well as the challenges. I think that I'll try to contextualize some of these things related to what does it look like to actually put it in deployment, and what are both why it's potentially useful and potentially how can we actually assess that it is actually being useful. So broadly speaking, AI has been doing tremendous things, both inside cardiology as well as outside, whether it comes to self-driving cars, playing Go. Deep learning provides a lot of opportunities, and we do see this in medical research. Everything from interpreting EKGs to echoes to nuclear medicine to MRI to even fundoscopic images. We're seeing that there are more patterns that AI can derive. And Partho mentioned essentially what is an opportunity to discover new patterns and new features in what some people might call a fishing expedition, but others could say is an opportunity for kind of evidence-driven discovery. But ultimately, despite all of this research, right now we're seeing very few AI systems that's currently deployed. When it comes to therapeutics like drugs, we think of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials. that first shows safety and then efficacy and then effect size before approval by the FDA. But unfortunately, right now, that's not how FDA approval of AI technologies are. We performed a review of all AI technologies approved by the FDA across all disciplines, whether it's radiology, dermatology, or cardiology. And we see that of currently devices and technologies being marketed, actively soliciting physicians to buy them, they were FDA approved on very few multi-site studies, less than a third. The vast majority only use retrospective data, which potentially have bias in both how you obtain the cohorts, as well as if there's any ways to wiggle about the model efficacy. And at this point, FDA approved algorithms are essentially never shown in a randomized session and never shown in a blinded evaluation with essentially an active control. And I think that that's really where the bottleneck is, where while on some level we need more explainability, really randomized clinical trials are how clinicians understand therapies. If you think about SGLT2 inhibitors or many of the other therapies, I might have on a very high order level mechanism what it happens, but I trust it because I see that it works in blinded clinical trials. And as a case in point, we've published some work now 2 years ago where we can show that AI models can very precisely assess ejection fraction. This is particularly helpful in the Echo lab. This is actually not point of care images first, but this has the opportunity to potentially be more precise. And this is something that's available in many FDA approved algorithms. But a lot of the questions that clinicians would ask, I think, aren't necessarily fully addressed by the sales reps. For example, it's easy to develop algorithms that work well in great and pretty images. On the left-hand side is what it looks like with really high quality echoes, with people with kind of easy, or I would say kind of good body habitus. And on the right-hand side, potentially are patients with COPD and with kind of maybe challenging body habitus. How, as clinicians, do we assess when the AI is working well and when is it a marketing speak in which kind of we're only shown really nice pictures? That's something that's really hard to assess until we get to deployment. So I'm really excited, and this is something that we've been working on over the last year, but we have a prospective, blinded, randomized clinical trial of assessment of ejection fraction that's going to be presented at the European Society of Cardiology Congress in August of this year. So the results are embargoed, but I'd like to walk through what the workflow and what the trial design is. And I hope that people stay tuned to August 29th to really hear about what the results are. The idea is that for our trial, we've actually prospectively asked sonographers and cardiologists to re-measure 3,500 echoes. These are echoes obtained at Cedars-Sinai in 2019, but all 3,500 are re-measured by sonographers. And then about half of them are shown to cardiologists and half were blinded replaced by the AI technology. And the endpoint and what we're trying to assess is actually to what degree do cardiologists adjust the sonographer initial tracings versus do cardiologists adjust the AI initial tracings. And before showing the kind of outcome variables, the first thing we have to do is blind clinicians. This is something that in many ways is very hard for most diagnostic aids because most clinical workflows don't have a prompting of an initial assessment. And we all know kind of humans are kind of, I would say, anchorable and biasable. So to this degree, we actually try to change our AI technology to exactly mimic the clinical workflow. For example, while an AI technology can measure every single beat and every single frame, sonographers on the right-hand side will probably only measure end systole and end diastole, maybe on the 4, maybe on the 2 chamber. So what we do is that we actually introduce the technology and only show the tracings of a representative beat done by AI so that ultimately, hopefully cardiologists can't tell whom did the initial assessment. So this is actually a video of the model in progress. We use Siemens Singa, which is a common PAC system that I think that many of you guys might use. And you can see that this is the current clinical workflow when someone traces it by hand. You can actually see a tracing, and you can actually see at systole and diastole. We can run a function, and then we can show this is what it looks like when the model actually retraces it. So you can actually see this is what the model tracing is for end systole and end diastole after parsing through the entire study. In the clinical trial, we only show one set of images. So we don't tell people whether it is by sonographer or AI. And we also directly measure both how long it takes for the cardiologist to readjust it and to the degree that the cardiologist readjusts it, both in terms of change in ejection fraction as well as change in the tracing being measured. So our primary endpoint for this trial is actually change between the initial to final assessment. We think of significant change as more than 5% change, because that's enough to be close to crossing across two categories, maybe going from normal to mild or mild to severe. And our statistical analysis is done both to test for non-inferiority as well as superiority for the proportion changed, as well as the mean absolute error of change. This is something where we're very excited about, but as a secondary outcome, we also want to see, does this actually save sonographer and cardiologist time? Because this is a blinded trial, we're also going to evaluate whether cardiologists can test or can tell whether it's done by AI or sonographer. So at the end of each study, we ask the cardiologist to say, oh, do you think this was done by AI? Do you think this is done by sonographer, or you really can't tell? And I would say that this could potentially actually allow us to do subset analysis to see if cardiologists truly can or can't tell. And finally, because this is a new technology, we actually had a secondary safety outcome, which is because these are studies that were actually originally done in 2019, we already have the historical cardiologist report and a 2019 EF. And this is an opportunity where if we even just looked at the sonographer arm, this would be the largest human test retest assessment, because we can actually see what the human cardiologist EF is in 2022 versus in 2021. And similarly, our safety outcome is that we're hoping that it is more consistent when initially prompted by AI in terms of the final cardiologist assessment. And we want to see if that is there a difference, or is there no difference there as well. In addition to real-time AI assessment, as kind of Partho mentioned, one of the other real interests that we have, and this is another clinical trial we have in deployment, is assessing whether this is actually can be used in large clinical databases. Can we actually see hidden trends or misdiagnosis or underdiagnosis of certain diseases? So for this is not done in real time, but we actually have an algorithm that measures wall thickness to identify left ventricular hypertrophy. We show that it is more precise than humans in terms of test retest. And then we actually characterize whether this is most likely due to cardiac amyloid, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, aortic stenosis, or another cause of LVH. But in the prospective setting, what we're doing, and this is everything I've showed previously is all research, is that we've actually scanned through the entire echo database at Cedars-Sinai, which is about 300,000 studies. And we're actually prospectively calling back the top 300 patients that our algorithm suggests are most likely to be cardiac amyloid. And then we'll ask cardiologists to reevaluate, go for the downstream PYP scan, SPEP, UPEP, all the standard workflow, but just with this cohort that we think deserves another look. And I would say that kind of our initial results are promising, or are kind of makes us convinced that we're willing to put resources and do this prospectively. Because on the right-hand side is actually the distribution of model prediction over the entire database. Cardiac amyloid is a rare disease. You can see the vast majority of predictions are 0 or not likely on the left-hand side. But on the long tail is a decent proportion, more than 2,000, of high or kind of intermediate probability. And we actually distribute this based off of the risk score. We can see that of the ones that we already know that are in the amyloid registry or on chart review, we can determine that there is amyloid, that there is a pretty clear relationship with the high probability patients, even though we might not have known at algorithm design time, are at high suspicion and warrant more surveillance. And the way we see this is that we've actually done a fair amount of chart biopsy before calling some of these patients. And we're seeing that there's a lot of patients with cardiac amyloid that might have only been known by the hematologist, or might have gotten a diagnosis elsewhere and saw a PCP, but never got care in the cardiology heart institute, such that it wasn't in our registries. But in terms of in direct linkage, we can actually show that there is more cardiac amyloid out there. And this is roughly what it looks like. This is spearheaded by one of our great cardiology fellows, Lily Stern, as well as kind of co-investigators, Dr. Susan Chang and Jig Patel, in which the dark green are the ones that are already on our cardiac amyloid registry. The light green are the ones that we can actually see and from chart review already tell that they have amyloid. And in yellow are the ones that we're calling back. And you can see that these tend to be older patients. These tend to be patients that are already known to have hypertrophy, but maybe only got the diagnosis of HFpEF, but ultimately deserve a second look for cardiac amyloid. And before finishing, I would say that kind of a big part of doing research in this field is trying to allow it to be generalizable. A lot of the work that we're doing is trying to show confidence, whether by proving it prospectively or open release of code and data. And this is a place where we should see time and time again in AI, larger data sets, collaborations across centers, and collaborations across different approaches is really the way to do it. And I think that we're kind of really have the opportunity with kind of current link lots and the Stanford Amy Center to actually release a lot of these images for essentially researcher use in the broader community. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, David. This is, again, an amazing talk. I think this has obviously generated a lot of discussion in the chat. I'll come to the chat in a second. I will invite now Dr. Troianos with one of the questions which I think came up, which sort of is different from what we have discussed so far. So I think both our speakers have covered this first question. So if Piyush, you don't mind going to the second question. I think the second question was, what is the perspective of application of AI-based echocardiogram in a dynamic clinical environment such as operating room, which Dr. Troianos and Piyush is very used to being in. So we'd like to get some perspective from you, Dr. Troianos, and then hopefully the speakers would have something to tell as well.
Yes. So first of all, thank you for including me in this very illustrious panel. It's really an honor to be part of this BrainX community. So yeah, as I was listening to the talks and thinking about what we do, obviously our work in the operating room and in the ICU is a very dynamic environment. So we kind of need answers quickly, and we need answers to guide further surgical therapy or other therapeutic interventions if patient is hypotensive, for example. So the way I look at just AI applied to echo, there's a couple. I divide in kind of two buckets. One is using AI for image acquisition. And I think there you could potentially utilize novice people, potentially nurses, to put a probe on a patient and guide their acquisition of data. You can also use that mode of AI to educate people. So interns, residents, people, physicians early on in their training can use that without necessarily an expert cardiologist or cardiac anesthesiologist right by their side. So they can learn a lot on their own with algorithms that are designed to detect, which valves, which ventricles, where the borders are, things of that nature. So that's where I view the AI in the world of image acquisition. Where the speakers talked about is basically using AI for a little more support of interpretation. And whether it be nuances in cardiac structure or thickness or echogenicity, things of that nature to guide kind of more long-term therapy. And I think it's really a great use in that regard. I don't think we're at the point yet where interpretation guided AI will lead to immediate intervention. In other words, I think we still need a lot of physician input at this point in time to say, hey, what we've determined is severe mitral regurgitation, a prolapsing posterior leaflet at P2 to then guide the surgeon. Now, we do have tools that we use in the operating room to remodel and show the mitral valve, for example, to a surgeon to guide that surgical therapy, but they augment our interpretation. And certainly in that dynamic environment, you have to take it in context of preload, afterload, and ischemia and other things going on in the OR. The other place that I could see potential use in a dynamic clinical environment is on a rapid response team where you may not have an expert echocardiographer. So you could potentially place a probe on a patient and just give you basic information. Is the patient hypovolemic? Does the patient have global ischemia? Does the patient have tamponade? Things like that, that would prompt a intervention. But those types of diagnosis could, be telesent to a more expert before someone sticks, a needle in someone's chest. So that's kind of broadly how I see the use of AI-based echocardiography in a dynamic clinical setting in sort of broad strokes.
Again, this is excellent insight to us who do not work in the operating room environment, and when been to rapid responses recently, luckily, but good to think about those. And it brings to the third question, which I think both Dr. Sengupta and Troianos have participated in. What are the changes you should consider in training and certification for echocardiography for us cardiologists who just work in the clinical environment to think about echocardiogram beyond what we know about echocardiogram?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And my disclaimer here, a couple of disclaimers. I'm on the Critical Care Echo Certification Committee of the NBE, and I'm also president of the NBE. As you know, we certify physicians. Kind of a funny thing would be, could we certify algorithms going forward? We haven't delved into that, but you could. It's generally what you do with a randomized study, like the studies that you presented here today. But that I think will be beyond my years as a clinician, and so I don't think I have to worry about that certifying algorithms. But certainly, we got to think about whether we could train people. Maybe they require less training if we use AI to augment image acquisition, for example, or nuances and interpretation augmented by AI. Potentially, we might need fewer cases to get to a level where we are currently at with physician-only interpretation of echocardiography. So I think there's a potential for more of the latter. I think NBE is not going to get into the business of certifying algorithms quite at this point in time, but I could see the potential for reducing the training requirements when you have reliable algorithms to support diagnosis and interpretation.
What do you think, Dr. Sengupta? You've been Echo Lab director for many, many years, I think, at Mount Sinai, and you might have come across this in your initial years when AI was just coming in vogue.
Yeah, it's interesting. So yesterday I was sitting down and the new fellows have joined, and we typically have we talk about topics in Echo, and there was physics. So we started talking about physics and piezoelectric crystal, and I started wondering, wow, we have not really changed the curriculum of what we teach in echocardiography. Now we have macromachinery transducers then, and we are talking about perhaps we need to update our physics curriculum, and maybe a portion of that physics could be talking about, not physics, I mean to say a portion of the curriculum could be some of this AI and what does it mean, what does it do, some introductory courses. And I foresee, I think, as we talk about National Board of Echocardiography and all, I foresee that maybe introductory sets of questions could be related to some of these topics. It's basic necessity because it's going to be soon there in all equipment. So what people are doing, what AI is capable of, when you trust, what do you do, is perhaps going to be the same direction like we use physics questions. And imagine the amount of the physics question that I was looking into, how much do we end up using? And what sticks to me, even at this stage, I do a lot of echo all the time, but a lot of those questions have become archaic. So it's perhaps necessary for us to think about the curriculum should be more updated with because the near future, the ultrasound equipments are going to be so complicated that with macromachinery transducers and AI being used in beamforming, and I think this whole field of what's the basic curriculum for a board examination will be soon updated. That's my feeling.
Yeah, the NBE currently has, for anesthesiologists, at least you may or may not know, we have 2 levels of certification. One is called basic, in which the information gleaned from the echocardiogram is used to, manage contractility, volume status, things of that nature. Mostly things that would be under the purview of an anesthesiologist. And you do require fewer cases to achieve that level of certification. And then we have the advanced perioperative TEE, which require basically twice as many echoes to do, because there you make an interpretation that guides surgical therapy or other interventions on a patient. So I could foresee that if you had AI, and right now AI is mainly looking at more basic types of things, you could potentially, need fewer cases to get competent to make those interpretations with the support of AI.
And one more comment, and I'm sure that there may be other comments from other people. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I couldn't stop myself thinking about, imagine if we were to do a teleconsultation in cardiology, and if the AI was guiding the nurses to take the images. So I could do the telemedicine, I have a patient, and I'm doing an emergent consultation in the ED. I could probably make a lot of important suggestion, and if there are experts not available on site, and if I'm the only sole cardiologist taking care of multiple hospitals, and these are the real facts that's happening. How do we do that? I mean, we'll start soon using some of these tools to drive our decision making, to get the information in a telemedicine virtual environment. And the utility of AI to just have a nurse become a sonographer is amazing, to get you the information that you need. And by the way, I find point of care ultrasound extremely helpful in the ED. It's amazing how much you can get done, how you triage your patients. Why is it that we are still diagnosing myocardial infarction, ST elevation, myocardial infarction based upon ECG? We have not yet changed the phenotype of how people present. We know that several patients will not uplift their ST, yet have occluded coronaries, and they're coming with. I think there's an amazing potential of using echocardiography and point of care ultrasound technology, and AI will allow us to expand our ability to diagnose and do better things.
I think I will take this conversation to David, because I think David, one question which comes up from what Dr. Sengupta just said, we saw the data which has been presented at European meeting, which we are all very excited about, and we'll hope to see that paper soon. But a lot of the data comes from Cedars-Sinai, and Cedars-Sinai has over 300,000 echocardiograms. What do you think, there about areas outside of academic medical centers where some echocardiographers read 40, 50, 60, 100 echocardiograms? And I'm sure a lot of them are not remeasuring the LV, and the inter-user variability amongst just those echocardiographers would be very high, just because of how the practice of echocardiogram works. Have you thought of sort of expanding in that direction? And then what kind of burden, I think that goes to the first question Piyush had up there, would be required to show to the FDA to get this through? Cancer medications get approved like 3-4 a week. What is that you need to do to show to the FDA that we can have an AI algorithm next month to just calculate EF around the country? And what would that what would be the impact of that?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, and I think something that we think about often. I'll focus it on kind of 2 levels. One is kind of as an individual echocardiographer or as a kind of echo lab director, how do you think about technologies? And 2, on the societal level or on FDA, how should we actually think about AI technologies? I think that as kind of you've alluded to, we need to see how well it works on our own data, right? I would say that kind of, you're absolutely right that kind of data from one center will be very different, both potentially in how images are acquired, the quality, the frequency, or the brevity. And I think that for any vendor, I think the key piece is that we need to see that it works on our own data. For our trial, we try to simulate this in that the model was actually trained only on Stanford data and then tested on Cedar's data. One of the relatively higher bars of validation for AI is we're doing this prospectively, and we're doing this entirely on external kind of validation set. And that externality is the hope that it generalizes. It works both for kind of high and low quality images. I think that a lot of the reps will show really kind of pretty images and then a good contour, but show us kind of what it looks like on the fly on maybe 20 less good quality images from your center. It's easy to cherry pick good images. What does it look like when you actually see it in practice? From an FDA perspective, I do think that we need a little bit more rigor. I think that the FDA in some ways isn't sure how to adjudicate these things, but standard ways that we think about therapies, is it evaluated prospectively? Is it actually shown in clinical trials? Is there an active control or comparison? I think all those things are things that we frankly think about for almost every other FDA approval, but haven't really pushed that paradigm onto AI technologies.
So, Dr. Troianos, I think I'll ask this question to you as well. I mean, if you were sitting on the FDA panel, FDA invites you to approve an AI technology, what are you looking at? What is your proof of burden which somebody has shown for you to say that, okay, you can use this tool starting tomorrow in Cleveland Clinic for measuring EF and it would be automatically released to the patient?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you need to compare to some gold standard. The problem, as was mentioned, is, are humans really an appropriate gold standard? AI has the potential to be a better tool, better determinant than humans are. And if you remember, many of the early papers in echocardiography did talk about that inter-person or inter-cardiologist variability that you have. But a lot of them from just a practical standpoint, from working in the OR, if the ejection fraction is 50 or 55, it doesn't matter that much to us. Basically, I have 3 ejection fractions that I need to know. Is it really good, really bad, or just okay? And that'll manage. So I don't need that precision with that particular tool. Where I need the precision and working with our surgeons is, okay, there's a leaky mitral valve. Is it on the P1 side of P2 or is it on the P2 side of P3? That type of detail we need. And I don't think AI is quite there yet to give us that sophistication where we can apply that in the operating room. But to answer your question, I think the FDA generally looks to compare to some standard. And right now it's the human standard that we have.
I think that is an excellent point or segue to ask both, I think, Partho and David, the question about, we talked a lot about EF. I mean, the world revolves around EF when it comes to cardio-oncology. Where are we with sort of, are we so far back in the pipeline for valve-related issues or atrial size-related issues when it comes to atrial fibrillation, which seems to be the most important disease on this planet?
Maybe I'll start here. I think that outside of kind of cardiologists and anesthesiologists, if we think about echo, I think that most clinicians think of EF. And I think that that's why I think a lot of people gravitate to that as the metric of choice to essentially implement AI. The second piece, as Dr. T mentioned, is that there is still inherent variability. The challenge or potentially the opportunity is that if we actually look at the variability in EF and use it in comparison to, say, variability of atrial sizes or variability of kind of diastology, ultimately, despite it not necessarily being the shiniest or the goldest of standards, is still better than I think our human variability when it comes to many other echo measurements. And I think that historically, echoes approached that variability in a different way. I think that we use strain because we see that there's variability in EF. And I think that I'd say that I'm on one side where I believe that if we can do EF better, maybe that might actually be the opportunity, or that might actually give us more information than using EF plus train or using additional measurements. If we can get the measurements that we have, but actually be more reproducible, I think that's a place where we can actually see more subtle changes.
So my response to that question is twofold. So first of all, I think the variability in the data and the standardization, there is no doubt that AI provides better precision. There is no doubt about that. But also, it's important that the variability is many times related to the shortcomings of how the images are acquired and how it's applied. I think we now have tools for us to kind of be able to help us as a guardrail. So this is a foreshortened image. AI can diagnose that and come up, okay, don't trace this. This is a foreshortened image. So some of the quality control on imaging is also equally important, not just measuring and expression of the standardization. I think that if there is a way for us to put it in a workflow, there's an opportunity that will lead to also better quality data and when to apply something. People sometimes just do not do it in the way that would be recommended. So I think there's an opportunity there, number one. Number two, having said all of that, that is required for quantitative echocardiography, the second question that is bigger problem, do we know how people integrate it? So, okay, so you have EF, you have diastolic function. Which direction is this patient going? That's a huge opportunity. There's a lot of variability of how people interpret the data and make sense of it, which is very open, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But I think that's where it's going to be very critical of making sense of the information to develop some kind of a suggestion of this is the amyloid phenotype based upon the integrated assessment. And then you can ask, why did you say that? Because there is LVH, you can see the mitral valve. So I think there is a potential for us to do the phenotyping using AI. That's an opportunity because lots of diseases are getting missed and are coming late. So that's a decision support tool of integrating the information and providing some idea about what the phenotype is like. You know, I think and setting up the stage for more discoveries of AI applications in the future.
I think that, thank you, everyone. I think that was a fascinating session. You know, thanks for all the work that you are doing, leading this field. Thanks for all the research and importantly, putting the data sets out there and also importantly, critiquing it, critiquing the technology in a scientific manner so that we are not just accepting what is being presented to us, but modifying it, making sure that before it goes to our patients, we are doing it the right way. But to all the speakers, I had one question. Where do you see AI in echocardiography 5 to 10 years from now? I put it in the chat, but we'll start with Dr. Sengupta.
10 years from now, that's beyond what I had even thought about. But I think everybody will have a digital twin. There will be a plan for a disease at an earlier stage based upon those digital twin. And echocardiography will be used more by people beyond their skill sets to perform. Perhaps physicians, beyond physicians, patients will start using echocardiography on themselves and sending images based upon all the impressions. I mean, these are wild thoughts, but these are the directions that are possible.
David, what do you think? And maybe you can possibly drop us a hint.
Yeah, I would say that I think the outside of AI, the huge trend is that there's going to be so much more POCUS, right? Whether that's done by the actual potential patient or even done in the ER or in any place, we're going to get much more data. And then my hope is that we will have much more precision in measurements so that we can see sudden changes. We can see potentially last week when I ate a cheeseburger, XY metric was similar, and then now three months later it looks different, and having both kind of more precise and more frequent data will allow us to maybe even come up with new diagnoses or new ways to think about disease.
That's awesome. Dr. Troianos, your thought? How about the dynamic environments?
Yeah, no, I agree with what the others have said. I think our biggest growth area and opportunity from a practical clinical area is in the point of care, whether it be in the ER, the ICU, up on the floor where you don't have a cardiologist, you don't have a cardiac anesthesiologist necessarily there all the time, that, you know, we can use AI to first acquire good quality images, and then to be used for making rapid decisions on managing that patient. But I think you're still going to need a little, some physician intervention, whether it's telemedicine or sending to say, yeah, go ahead, put a needle around their heart to drain that pericardial fluid. I can't see that coming in less than 10 years, but certainly we will have the ability to gain images by less qualified sonographers, if you will, in the very near future.
Thank you. Dr. Guha.
A great question, and I'll stick to
comments?
the field of cardio-oncology. I think I'm going to go out of the field of echo a bit just to make the field a little more general. I'm hoping that we can derive EFs out of EKGs, and we can do it on everyone undergoing cancer treatment. And then for the right ones, we can do an echo with all the things, all the speakers have already mentioned. So the rest of the workflow, I'm hoping, will go back to the field of echocardiography, but be able to derive EFs out of EKGs in a very dependable manner, because those are easier to get for so many more cancer patients.
Well, those are some great thoughts. And with that, I would like to thank all the speakers, Dr. Guha, Dr. Troianos, Dr. Ouyang, Dr. Sengupta, for a great session. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and participating in the session today. And for our future events, please join us through our website, through the LinkedIn group. We have these live sessions over here. If you miss any part of it, you can follow us up on the YouTube channel, our podcast series, or drop us an email. So we'll close the session. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.